Good morning. My name is Troy Wolf, and I am a targeted individual. Today's date is 12/11/2018. This will be the second or third time I've tried to shorten down the conclusion with all the new information and piecing this story together. It actually might get longer. Yeah, I did all 4 recordings yesterday of the story, and in putting more pieces together over the weekend on the conclusion, it's pretty interesting given what people had said, how this can be all twisted. At the end of my conclusion, of course, I'm going to go into my personal thought on the whole issue, and how interesting it is that when you look at this kind of stuff and what has transpired, the collusion, the absolute down and out collusion of individuals to carry this off. Let me get started right away. Obviously, my story covered the dates from 2003 to 2018. I kind of put a title to my story as The Perfect Storm, because it really technically was a conglomeration of individuals that had to put something together, all get on the same page, and now basically just close their mouths about it. So anyways, 2003, if you listen to the 4 parts in the story, 2003, talking to a friend, a coworker at the warehouse about having a kid. Then having this drug dealer slash management from the warehouse approach me about having a kid. And now the potential and the possibility of having this individual being involved with Allegheny County Sheriff's Department. 2004, 2005, this individual, this drug dealer, Stacy, following me around out there on the road when I was truck driving, was blatantly an attempt to take me down, out chasing me around. Obviously got the investigation started based upon whatever she had said to all the police departments in 2004. I mean, obviously in 2005 couldn't handle the harassment and the stalking and the monitoring of everything I was doing, so I quit. 2005, 2006 enters the mole planted by Allegheny County. They really technically didn't have any inside track to get close to me and monitor who I was. Obviously what this lady, this Stacy, must have said must have been made me out to be a pretty big deal if Allegheny County would go as far as to plant somebody to find out who I was. Obviously this individual was a former drug dealer herself. And like I said in the story, interestingly enough, on the bracelet in 2007, ended up, well, I think it was more 2005, 2006, ended up becoming very, very disgruntled with me because the relationship didn't work in 2006. And that became very evident and apparent in 2007. You might as well say, in essence, up to today. Obviously, there's a number of stories that I have not talked about that would certainly define that. But anyways, that's where the mole enters in 2005, 2006. Also 2006, the mechanic, a drug user, and a former friend of this mole, obviously instrumental in beginning to help the whole situation. Through my job. Then the mistake that was made obviously in 2010, 2011 time frame of moving into a house next door to the ex-boyfriend of this drug dealer, Grandma Stacy, which made my life for the 3+ years there a living hell. 2010 to 2012, that time frame of the brain being picked, alterations mixed with my own personal life. It was interesting how, it was almost like for a while you would live in a haze and not exactly sure what was going on. 2012, asked a coworker, an individual who was also a drug dealer, now with a kid, that was certainly sitting on paper and reporting to a PO, considering the offense happened in 2012, to have a kid. That individual said no. Subsequent conversations, obviously, I'll fuck you all right, was one that sticks in my head very well. 2012, ran back into this drug dealer, Grandma, slash management, at a Walmart. So years later, you run into this individual, and without the ability to really devastate my life back in 2004, 2005, and then spend an enormous amount of money out there tracking me around. Obviously, this person was still disgruntled. So it's interesting, and I told that story, how she disappears, and then her boyfriend chases us around the Walmart. Obviously, in the background the whole time between 2003 and 2012 was enormous surveillance. Like I said, stuff disappearing. Surveillance, my guess is between FBI, CIA, local law enforcement, and chased around by, in essence, the drug users. Because obviously people were going to pass this story on. So this Grandma was going to tell everybody that she supplied, and hence the reason I had gotten so many individuals with beat up cars and basically lived in trashy neighborhoods. And this surveillance obviously went on for 10 years. The reason I pinpoint FBI, CIA, and local law enforcement, of course, as well, who else has the technology when you set cameras? And there's actually, it's chronicled in some videos I have, where they could actually come in, and it didn't matter if it was a hardwired camera or a wireless camera, but they could actually turn that camera fuzzy, have it continue to record, and then when they left, went back to the normal status of a camera. Who else would have that technology? Not the average Joe. Then the comment from a manager on the job, you begin to figure out stuff in 2012. Stuff was going on in the company, and the people have spent enough money on you, Troy. Meaning that obviously this surveillance has been going on for a long time, and people are getting tired of tracking me around. 2010, 2012, the harassment. Like I said, the involvement from the drug dealers, the ex-boyfriend, the neighbors that I was living next to. Hence the reasons being stolen, stuff being stolen, disappearing, break-ins repeatedly. So if you're an individual on the outside and you were saying, well, that's great, Troy, you can label this as the perfect storm and you can lay this out, but what do people have to gain by pulling this off? Well, let me lay that out for you. This particular drug dealer slash Grandma slash management for this warehouse company obviously had a grudge, and it would be just the satisfaction to get back at me. Now, also, a side note that I didn't talk about in the story is that this individual apparently was raped as a child, and so now also carried that grudge, either from an uncle or a father or stepfather or something like that. It was years ago that she had told me the story. I can't remember all the details on it. And then also notoriety in the drug user community. So if you're out there pushing drugs and you can stand back and you say, hey, look, I've wrecked somebody based upon not liking them or having a problem with them, I would imagine that would be a feather in that individual's hat. The former drug dealer obviously getting even as well for a terrible childhood and upbringing. I had heard all the stories, and I will attest to it that it's actually horrific. Also a kickback from law enforcement for their own personal record, which was lengthy. So if you look at it from a perspective of, well, I can possibly gain some money out of this, or I can have offenses on my record drop off and get me back into society and everything's wiped clean, why not? Also, too, I think the fact for justice for being raped and then having a child out of this rape, and that was the only child this individual ever had. So also you take now a second person that was jilted in life, and what better scenario than to try to do a payback on somebody. Then you take yet another drug dealer. This is the individual, this Chrissy, that has a child. Once again, this person was just arrested for heroin. So you get kickback from law enforcement for the record, clean up my record basically, get me back into society without any issues and problems. And like I had made the statement in the comment, I believe, in the story, it's interesting when you went and looked up this person's record, how their final record changed to only 3 grams of heroin after she had a ton of it strapped to her pregnant stomach. The same year that my story from going from a pedophile to a dangerous individual had changed. So I'm making the comparison and linking those two and saying, that's really interesting that there's such a connection there. Also, obviously, Outagamie County Sheriff's Department. If, in fact, this drug dealer was involved with Outagamie County and they had gotten this all started, and then all of a sudden you go out 10 years and you have spent an enormous amount of money and time and you have netted nothing, that pretty much puts egg on the face of Outagamie County. So they have no choice. They want restitution for spending all this time and money. So, think about it. And the fact that then I was offered up as the community's test subject, stating that, well, we got to test all these devices, and what better person to do it on than somebody we've not been able to dig any information up on. So there is all the scenario of what to gain. Obviously, people had to come together and get on the same page story-wise, and that's certainly when enters the family, and that's what I find very disturbing. So exactly what was done. If you take that former drug dealer, collusion with a drug dealer, or just fact Outagamie County, ended up hypnotizing me on the love seat in the hotel in 2012. Obviously, I began to recall it. There were a number of individuals standing around me when this was being done. I wish, and I'm thinking certainly of being re-hypnotized so that I could actually put the names together with the faces that were standing there that day. And of course, that whole session and stuff was video and audioed because the plan was to get me on this program. Now you also take this former drug dealer, obviously with another drug dealer, where they jockeyed up the audio and video. And either Outagamie County at the time was not involved, or they then took the garbled SD cards that have all been modified and then went to the police. My understanding, like I said in the story about a conversation I overheard, is that they approached the police. The police chose to do nothing. That would tell me that they've edited something up. They presented it to the police. They had no interest. And then they decided to go ahead and do it themselves. So, given the fact that Outagamie County was the primary organization that was hitting me, along with Affinity Medical Group, would tell me that either this was a rogue attack, meaning that this wasn't on the books, and they were just going to do this underneath the table, or something to that impact and effect. Then you take the former drug dealer as well, with a drug dealer and the neighbor, and they discuss a plan to put together to get this all done. Because like I said, and I thought I talked about this in the story, I overheard the conversation with the neighbors and her stating that you're spending too much time with her. I don't want this to turn out to be much more than that. And that would fit the same time frame with what was going on and some of these individuals. Then you take a former drug dealer, and that's when the whole frame-up becomes apparent. You know, if you take an SD card story and you say, well, guy was a hoodlum 20, 30 years ago, and you take that to the police, you're going to say, well, that's dead and gone. We don't want to deal with that. The only thing we're interested in is relevancy. Well, here comes the frame-up, where this drug dealer obviously put her kid down next to me, left the room, kid was screaming, and then of course ran to the PO to have this investigated, which got everybody involved. I find that very, very interesting. Then you take, of course, a former drug dealer. Once again, a video and audio conjuring up scenarios on SD cards. This is where they have to approach the family. Also with the frame-up, that draws the family in, I would think, even closer. If I said that this twisting up my stories and not recording my yes and no responses today have stopped, I would be lying. It's interesting to me, as I'm going through the cycles in whatever house I'm in, this individual that I'm staying with will ask me a yes and no question at 10 or 11 after the hour and 10 or 11 to the top of the hour, almost like stating, you're now some experiment, you're giving me a yes and no response, that you are okay with doing this. It's very strange how this is going on right now. That drug dealer with a kid. Isn't that funny and interesting that shortly before they decide to stick me on this program, that this individual is awarded at the Fox Valley Technical College. And then, of course, the former drug dealer is out speaking at it. So, you know, there is such collusion here. It's crazy. And to try to get people to understand and listen to what you've got going on and say something good is, you know, nothing good is going to come out of this, and they all just kind of walk away, is really insane. Hence the reason they had to pull the family in so tight. 2013 to today, obviously the burning continues, and the primary focus now is my lungs. So this is a situation of, well, we've done the deed, now we have to eliminate this individual, because obviously dead men tell no tales. On occasions, I continue to get hypnotized. Either this is through some sort of clicker device or some sort of post-hypnotic suggestion. Then they seem to doctor it up, because I've already heard about that, and then spit it out on SD cards to whoever is going to listen to it, to keep this cycle going. Once again, my stuff continues to get rifled through, from receipts to what's in my wallet to you name it. There has been so much involvement, you know, with trying to make sure my SD cards are erased. I don't know how many times, obviously, I've been hit with EMP. And like I believe I talked about it in the story, maybe I didn't, that I've had to now build Faraday cages, I don't think I did, for my SD cards to keep them safe. Otherwise, every month, minimally, they were hitting any photographs that I was taking. And certainly when I capture something very interesting, I'm then hounded until that is destroyed. But something I found very disturbing in putting this whole story together, putting the notes together, putting comments and conversations people had had, I came across a situation and scenario that is very plausible and shows my parents' and family's involvement. And it almost makes me nauseated to even talk about it. But I have to spit this out because this is actually part of what it was going on and was happening during the years of this high intense burning. Way back in 2005, excuse me, let me take a drink. Way back in 2005, when I chose to go over the road and stay over the road and decide to move out of Tallulah Street. When everybody came together, family, to move everybody out of Tallulah, and my youngest brother and my mother were going to move in together, I remember the day my mother stood there on the front porch crying. And asking what was going on, I had gotten no answer. It was almost look me in the eye, look me in the face, and then say nothing. So I couldn't refer that to the fact that I was trying to go over the road continuing driving, or if in fact my youngest brother was now involved with this drug dealer grandma, and she told him what she reported me to all the police departments over. Once again, like I said, there is absolutely no truth to anything she possibly would have said. And that's the funny thing, and that's the kicker about it, is that, of course, I was never approached by law enforcement. I was never asked any questions. So obviously she knew very well how to play the system and get people to focus on me, the fact that she is a drug dealer, which would also tell me that she had a number of individuals' input and advice on how to really stick her foot up my ass. So once again, yeah, like I said, my youngest brother, his involvement possibly with this drug dealer. Now, given over the years what I've watched, now there's a possible involvement with Stacy, with Stacy the drug dealer, called Grandma, and the former drug dealer, Katie. At one point in time, I'm sure, they had run across each other's paths, or they knew each other. The conjuring up of the idea to have me hypnotized, I mean, right there is highly illegal. And that's another reason why all of this stays so tightly swept under the rug. During the time frame, or shortly after the hypnotism, the mother-brother argument, where she kept talking about, yeah, he keeps claiming it's serious and shouldn't be taken lightly. And I never got an answer as towards what the two of them were actually arguing about. And this was my brother, that to this day, of course, is a firefighter. So once they had their ducks in a row, I think, honestly, they approached the family and expressed some sort of concern. Because you have to, when you're going to commit a crime, you have to get everybody involved. Something of this magnitude that keeps everybody on the same page. If there was any kind of safe haven during this whole time frame for me to go to, the plan wouldn't work. So of course, once again, in comes this Chrissy, a drug dealer, which almost cemented the whole situation by bringing up an issue or trying to make something relevant and current. Also in the background that was going on in my life at the time, I had a step-grandfather that passed away in 2009. He and I were stuck together like glue. We did a lot of stuff together. But when I heard of his sudden passing in 2009, and apparently they ruled it as suspicious, and I, up until a couple of years ago, still didn't know all the details, that he was found in a pool of blood. I believe it was on the garage floor. You have to question if the family wasn't eager to find out what was in my head. And I'm going to make this statement based upon what this Katie had said to me. So this 2009 death comes of the step-grandfather. I don't attend the funeral. I'm not going to go into my personal life and history and story on why I don't want to attend any funerals, but I didn't attend. So when I was actually hypnotized about a week or so later, when I started remembering all what was going on during the hypnotism, when I had asked this Katie, who hypnotized me and why, she basically gave me this response. Well, your mother hypnotized you. She wanted to know what was in your head. So now if you connect those two and say, well, did she want to know what was in my head because of the suspicious death? Or did she want to know what was in my head based upon the crying on the porch in Tallulah back in 2005? Or a combination of all of it? Or was all that just a lie? I'm not sure. It's interestingly on finding out, or I should say it's weird enough, that shortly thereafter the hypnotism, when I'd walked into my mother's house and her sitting on the chair, her making that statement. Well, I guess we found out more than we wanted to know. Well, of course, that would double back and point the finger right at her to wanting me to be hypnotized. Interestingly enough, too, my father had made a comment. Obviously, this Katie individual hung out at the hotel and lived there for a number of years. I, of course, frequented the hotel on several occasions, stayed there. And, of course, they had a cupboard at the front of the hotel which had free coffee. Father had made a comment to me one time that, yeah, when he ever shows up, he'll duck into that cupboard to get himself a cup of coffee. Well, I can attest to this. In all the years that I've been involved in this with this Katie, and being around the hotel, he had never ducked into the hotel once, the whole time that I was there. So why would you make that statement? So when technically are you showing up at the hotel that I didn't see you ducking into the cupboard for a cup of coffee? I just find that statement very interesting as well. Interestingly enough, too, my father began to make comments about this Chrissy and her kid. Because like I said, I was actually going over and snow blowing and mowing the lawn and did the Christmas thing and whatnot with this individual. Why all of a sudden is my father carrying some sort of torch for this Chrissy? I couldn't understand it. So does that mean that the story then was relayed to my father and mother about the kid screaming on the floor, and therefore, you know, my family's carrying a torch and I need to be hypnotized and investigate? I don't know. I don't understand it all. Like I said, I'm going through what people had said and what was going on. Once again, then, to my mother, it showed up one fall afternoon. There were two people, a man and a woman, sitting at her dining room table. Interestingly enough, changing the life insurance policy, and I was rushed off, claiming that that's what she was doing. I find it suspicious that two individuals with all this paperwork laying out on the table, and it's about her life insurance. I don't know how many people need to be involved when you want to make an update to your own life insurance and policy. I'm not sure how that works. 2014, shortly after my mother's horrific accident, we were sitting all in a waiting room. My mother had gone in for a checkup, and a comment was basically made out of my mouth about, that sounds crazy that you did that, to an individual in the family. My oldest brother turned around and said, well, you're the nuts one. So I took that comment and that statement like, wow, what has somebody basically told you? When I ran into my father's sister in a Walmart parking lot, and she makes that comment on how I'm looking, and she says, you appear fine. Like, what's wrong with you? So I'm not exactly sure what was told to her. Also, something that is not even on my list here of stuff to talk about is I found it very interesting that all the time before this all started going on in the background, my father seemed to be running around wanting to know everybody that I had for a friend in the past, wanting to figure out where they were. I had dated a lady for over 10 years. He kept asking me, do I know where she is? Do I know where she is? And I looked at him like, what is it to you? I don't know. She could be back in the United States. She could be living back in England. I don't know. But I found it interesting that he was looking in the background for my friends. Also interesting, I had a junior high school friend that lived on the same block that we lived on. growing up. When I made a reference and a comment to him, excuse me, a couple months ago, he said, well, I don't even think they live there anymore. Well, lo and behold, I found out they don't live there anymore. I'm not exactly sure how anybody knew that, considering this was my friend from junior high school, but whatever. Once again, I was having a conversation with my mother. We were sitting in the living room. I told her that the comment that was made over the work radio is that throughout this year at the garbage company, that they had hit me over 70 to 80,000 times. When I went and turned and looked at her here, she was crying. And I'm like, why would you cry about this? I'm just telling you the story, unless you weren't involved putting this together. Interestingly enough, too, I had a conversation with my mother over the weekend. I had gotten hit so hard, of course, in January 2013 that I said, if this happens again, and I believe it was over the weekend before it happened, that I'm going to call you to come pick me up. And when I called her the day that it all happened, I got no response. She didn't pick up the phone, nothing. Not until after all the beating on me, the four hits to the prostate actually had taken place. What's interesting too, in the time frame that I was spending with my mother, and there was a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there. Back in 2017, I always knew when she was home, because I could be sitting in the living room with the TV on, and all of a sudden I get hit, and then she walks through the door. I find that very interesting and funny, almost as if whatever device she had in her purse or in her personal vehicle, she would push the button on, I'd get hit, or something to that effect, and then she'd come through the door. Interestingly enough, in that same time frame, I remember the night that she had arrived at the front door, and she was on the phone stating, talking to either an investigator or the police department or somebody, saying, I want this investigated. I have no reading. Now, I'm not going to give all the details, but during that time frame, I was ramping up, obviously, protection and shielding. So it's interesting to me that all of a sudden I have no reading. What was really strange about it is I happened to, on a bus the following day, make it all the way across town to Katie's house, where literally the next door neighbor was being picked up by the police and taken downtown for questioning. That is a very strange story. Is there a connection there? I've heard different things from different people. Well, maybe you aren't completely dead. Maybe you're partially dead. Maybe, well, I think, and maybe that's the rub and the problem between the family and this Katie and this other group on the other side. One group wants complete obliteration. Another side wants a burning and a lack of having a kid. I'm not exactly sure. It's just weird, some of the comments people have made. Talking to my youngest brother about this, he basically, I'll say it again, he told me to basically shut up. You can't do anything about it anyway, so why worry about it? Well, I'm sorry. Roles were reversed in anybody's life. Eventually they'd have to say, I'm not going to live like this. Interestingly enough, the whole scenario that went down with my youngest brother and his arrest, and the day I was standing there in my mother's living room with the house in a disarray, and my mother turning to this Katie and saying, do you think this has anything to do with, and then closed her mouth, while Katie stood there shaking her head no. What's the connection? Mother, brother. Interestingly enough, during the time frame 2016, I was going to the gym, obviously sleeping much of the afternoon, early morning. I wake up to, do it, Chris, do it, Chris. It's not like he has anything or anything to offer anyone. So once again, you're looking at a situation here that says, okay, I just heard this. This just went on. I was told at a gas station that I've been chipped. My youngest brother is on his way to prison. What makes him much different than the thugs that are out here doing this for profit? Is he now twisted to benefit and profit by turning tail on me to make his life and his upcoming sentence and this, that, and the other lighter? Good question. Mother, brother, overheard a conversation coming out of the restroom at my mother's house. Youngest brother states, this is going to end in suicide. Mother speaks up, no, it won't. Father Katie, living over in Menasha. Father walks out the back door, gives this Katie a big hug, and then proceeds to whisper a bunch of stuff to her standing in the backyard in Menasha. Stepmother's comments. So interestingly enough, when I had gotten together with my father 2018, a couple months ago, to go over the road truck driving, her comment about he's planning like he's not coming back. And in the story, if you pay attention to the details, it truly was a situation of trying to put me to sleep while I was driving and have an accident. Once again, this is a situation where you've done all this damage. I am the evidence right here. Everything that has been done to me, I am the evidence. So if you want these corrupt individuals and people to get away with this crime, you have to get rid of the evidence. And like I said, yeah, I had tried to get me to fall asleep behind the wheel of a semi. Interestingly enough, during that time frame of getting ready to go over the road, Father pipes up and asks me a question. Hey, do you think your scooter will be able to fit in the back of my minivan? I got no explanation of why he was even thinking that. That logically made no sense to me. And I kind of looked at him and I said, why would I need to do that? I would just simply drive the scooter and park it where it needs to be. But no answer as towards why that comment really was made. Once again, you roll back the clock to 2013 when this was going on, making the comments and selling me back my life insurance policy, stating, now you had the money to bury yourself. The comments being made in 2013 about having no kids, shouldn't have a relationship, and should never be married. And then, of course, the comment of what age people should die. And then, when you think about it, once again, the neighbor, the ex-boyfriend of this drug dealer, Stacy, telling him when I will be moved out of that house. He'll be moved out of this house within 3 months. So what is the connection and the collusion going on between family, the next-door neighbor, Katie, the next-door neighbor, obviously the ex-boyfriend and Stacy, Chrissy's involvement coming in with her kid? It's just all very, very fishy. Overheard a conversation, and this was getting to the point where my mother had basically ejected me. And she even stated, she said, I want the freedom to make my own phone calls and have conversations, this, that, and the other. But here's the conversation that I overheard on the phone, my mother with a friend, is making a statement in reference to me that it would be my sister-in-law makes a statement and says, oh, yeah, he needs to have a relationship. Well, in my mother's conversation with his friend, she basically states, no, he's made bad choices. He doesn't need anything. So I find that interesting that, once again, here's the input of my family at the age now today of 49, controlling my life. Also then, I heard out of both parents, out of their mouths, about the ability to control and stop my smoking, of course my energy drinking, and then the constant discussion of behavior control, which I will get into that in a minute here, which I find very interesting as well. I came across an event as well. My eldest brother obviously must have come into town one time. I was staying at my mother's. I had gone to a dating site. And on this particular dating site, some of the women were putting out pictures of themselves half naked. Well, obviously, somebody in the family checked the history and said, well, we can't have that. So they basically changed the Wi-Fi password and blocked me out of it. When I asked my mother about it, she said she got rid of the Wi-Fi. You went to her bedroom, and there the Wi-Fi sits in the box. And lo and behold, you catch her 2 or 3 times on a pad, on a tablet, on the internet. So basically, it's I want to control you, Troy, and your behavior, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what's going on. Once again, I'm going to state this, 49 years old. Also, then you could kind of see when this Katie individual was staying at the hotel and the use of the Wi-Fi, and you would visit some sites that were questionable to her. Of course, she would then comment on it. And since she wasn't digging up the history on where we were going on her computer, somebody else was doing it and telling her about it, and then she would comment back to me that you in fact have been at this website. So you can once again see a behavior modification and control. It's interesting today, obviously Katie has no communication with my family anymore, and my communication right now with my family is minimal to none. You question if Katie wasn't the driving force, obviously, behind all this. This individual's obviously background and twisted scenario. I did my best to look something up, and I was trying to put a word to this, and I still can't. But what do you call an individual that spends an enormous amount of time watching police shows, now thinking they are a police officer? That's almost the mentality that you get out of this individual. Once again, now going back to that relationship in 2015, I had heard more than one comment and conversation from the family about even having a relationship, and almost in essence wanting it to end. I was in the car a couple weeks ago with my mother, made a comment about potentially property being up north in an individual's name that's been a part of this. She sat awful quiet in the car. I remember a comment my stepmother had made, we'll be able to do this kind of stuff when we're rich. This was shortly before this all began, but I find it an interesting statement. I find what's really sickening is it a potential and possibility that eventually just my parents had offered me up to this program for profit. I would hate to think that my family members have ever had any involvement in this, but you know what? I can't get away from what was said is what was said. It's interesting enough, and I've made this comment in the story, how I've not heard from any of my brothers, the eldest brother and the firefighter, essentially since this started. Obviously, my mother had the accident in 2013. 2014, apart from that, I've never heard a word from them. Also reflecting to the SD cards, enter the story and it gets twisted. Obviously, that's part of getting people all on the same page. And it seems interesting, too, in regards to the family and friends. This Katie's still digging for shit. This is December 2018. And it's almost like, let's just keep this going. We need to really indicate that this person is a bad person. We need to keep this rolling. And to me, it's all profit. We need to keep making money. Once again, I think I talked about this in the story, the fact that when I found out my location was in Mexico in a city, and then to find out my eldest brother was vacationing there. Also, about a month or so ago, stating my location was now in Missouri, and the only person that I know in the family that was out on the road would have been my father. Interestingly enough, too, had to do a little schooling just before hitting the road in Indianapolis. First couple days of school were great. Father came off the road with his instructor and was milling around the school. In the classroom, I started getting hit in the back. I turned around, and my father is standing in the doorway. Or not necessarily standing, but passing the doorway back and forth. Yeah, interestingly enough, I had bought the scooter. My brother had come into town with his wife back in 2016. He spotted me, and his wife basically states to him, "Don't get involved." So I saw my brother from 2014 to today once, and that's when the statement was made. Interestingly enough, too, about these opaque canisters, I have been trying desperately to do a ton of research on this nanotechnology. I question the fact that the opaque canisters were both at my mother's house and at this Katie's room at the hotel. Question about it is, was in fact these canisters full of nanotech, and then they were used then to gather the supplements? If you looked at these film canisters and you think about dumping that stuff in people's food and drink, that would have extremely loaded me up with nanotech for the events that took place in 2013. Interestingly enough, something that's happened in the last week. I've had a conversation with my mother telling her that I was having this problem with the storage unit and who's involved. Obviously not living with my mother, my mail is over there. Instead of contacting me on the phone and telling me I've got some mail, when do you want to pick it up? She goes and drops it at the storage unit. So now you have basically given my personal mail to people that have been involved in this whole issue. That makes no sense. Interestingly enough, too, both my father and my mother have now made comments in the last year about selling off all my stuff in the storage unit. So in explaining the whole story to both my mother and father, you now want to take what I have left of my life and get rid of that as well. Interesting. Little background with my father and the grudge. When I moved back from Las Vegas, 2001, 2000 time frame, went to work for him. That didn't pan out very well. Gave my notice and quit. Within weeks, he was hounding not only myself, but an ex-girlfriend, even showing up at her work. He and I then subsequently had an altercation by it, and then we went on this 10-year almost dry spell of even communicating. So that's just a brief history background of the story between he and I. So is there a motive here for revenge? Absolutely there is. It's interesting too that my mother and I have been disgruntled. She's been disgruntled with me at times for the choices and decisions in my life that I've made. On a few occasions as well, years ago, she would say, "Well, you shouldn't have a kid, you're too old." And this was during the time frame that my youngest brother was having a kid. But now what's funny to me is now that I've been eradicated, it's almost like I never made that comment, and we're not going down that road to have that discussion. It's like, surprise. It's interestingly enough, too, that in the last couple of years, my mother makes this statement. She says, "Well, I really hope you attend my funeral." And I find that interesting because, like I said, I didn't attend the step-grandfathers. So is that in the mix of the hypnotism and all of this, or is this the fact that there was high family involvement, and from that perspective and standpoint, the likelihood of me attending a funeral will be slim to none? It's interesting too today. Obviously, I've heard mixed reports on whether you should tell people, whether you should not. Attitude today seems to be out of my mother, and I question this. What's interesting is she's kind of turned the tables back on me, and she almost gives me this attitude that I'm involved with her and her, or my youngest brother, in doing some sort of shady, underhanded situation, and I'm constantly getting the finger pointed at. Now, I'll tell you this straight up. I've got enough going on in my life. I have no interest in involvement in anybody else's life, especially the families. So is this more like a situation of I'm guilty for what's happened here, so I could expect retaliation out of you? So that's where her attack is? I don't know. I don't understand it. Interestingly enough, to my eldest brother, and I found this out over months, is that all of a sudden on a weekend I would get hit extremely hard. And I couldn't understand it. Subsequently, about a week or so later, I'd find out that my brother, my eldest brother, was in town that particular weekend. So the question is now, where am I today? Let me take a look at what time frame I'm at. Where am I today? Well, obviously, I've been putting this story out. Unfortunately, yes, I've had to sit in a house of an individual that's obviously involved. So the recording of what I'm doing and what's going on is well known. So obviously, September through December, it's been a upscale burning of the lungs, and I talked about all that in the story. It's interestingly enough, when I really started to put the words to a recording here, that it seems like things are speeding up, because it's immaterial. I guess I look at it like this, that they know about it. I guess, how do I want to word this? It's speeding up from the standpoint of he's almost dead, let's get this over with, because if he figures it out and reports us, it's too late technically for him to do anything about it. So that's what I've kind of watched in the last month. Is just this ramp up, especially the last 2 weeks, is this ramp up to really get this done. What I have to do is I have to apologize, obviously. If you listen to some of these recordings, especially from recording 3 to recording 4 to obviously this conclusion, all of a sudden you'll find out that there'll be big pop noises in the recording. Obviously that was a time frame. I'm sitting here by a window getting hit. And then subsequently, after the popping noises, you will sometimes catch me slurring my speech and screwing stuff up, because I'm actually getting hit in the head. So I find that interesting, the effects and impacts that has. I haven't really gone ahead in any of these videos and put very many pictures of myself, if any, and I haven't made that determination if I'm going to do that. I don't find myself being very photogenic, so I probably won't do it. So now I'm going to take a couple minutes here and get on to some issues that I find very pertinent to what's going on in my story, as well as I see what's going on in the background and possibly with other individuals. So anyways, I put the perfect storm together. I looked at it from a perspective of this is possibly the family's involvement. But I find this interesting. Let's start off with this one. Yeah, the 2003 to 2013 surveillance, or 2012. Obviously 10 years. Netted nothing. So we have to have some resolve, and we have to basically recoup the money. And the egg that's on our face, we have to wash that off. And so putting me on this program is, I guess, the best idea. Once again, like I said, when I was out driving, they were, trying to get me off the road by claiming I was a drug dealer, nut job, bad driver, on and on and on. Stories just keep getting made up. It was about approximately 2 years ago I started hearing that I was a murderer and I had killed people. So people seem to go way out to try to frame me, implicate me, keep this program running. and it's all insane. UHF, VHF, if you guys remember back to 2006, 2007, when we all had to switch to digital, and I had overheard that the military wanted to use those bands. Does this have any involvement in this targeting and what's going on today? I'm not sure. Interestingly enough as well, Wi-Fi. I would urge people to check the Wi-Fi connections. Because what I had found out at obviously one of the places, even if you disconnect everything, it will not shut off that Wi-Fi that is obviously connected to your house. Meaning that they took that box down the street, gave it to a neighbor, because I believe that box was assigned to the cameras that were in the house, and it would have taken too much work to change all that. So let's just move the signal down the street and keep the Wi-Fi running. Let's see here. Are they using this kind of technology in the retirement communities? I actually have a story that would prove yes. I had an individual working at a retirement community, told me that people were dying off left and right. Also told me that there was an individual pulling up in a minivan out in the front parking lot. Would pull up in the parking lot, sit in their vehicle for 3 to 4 hours on a notebook computer, do a bunch of stuff, and then a couple hours later leave. I had actually subsequently went over there to find out if this evidence was true. And this individual, there they sit in the parking lot at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with the laptop open. When I circled this person in the parking lot, they hit me in the car that I was sitting in. So what I gather and guess that this is being used on retirement communities, absolutely. That comes out hand in hand with why we no longer hear about Social Security. So that would be my guess. There's a bunch of personal stuff. I'm not going to get into that. I will make that connection again. The director of this plasma center, I'll call him once again Redbeard, made a statement about I was, out of 74,000, they chose me. The population basically of Appleton, and I was chosen. The honoring of this individual at the Fox Valley Technical College. For being a single mother and a student, you get an award? That doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense that this Katie had to go speak at it as well. You know, in doing the research on the Fox Valley Technical College's website, they have quite the criminal justice department. And who knows, maybe on the back pages of that website my name is in there somewhere. Interestingly enough, this Chrissy has always been lingering around in the background, but really technically no more involvement after the setup in 2012. I couple that with the combination of, you know, this Chrissy and the setup with the comment over the CB in Maryland about this is what you get for fucking with a black baby. I would have to state too, in all the states I've driven in, obviously truck driving, the worst states have got to be Texas, Florida, Indiana, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina. I'm not saying I didn't get hit in other states like New York, but I would have to say that those 6 were the worst. I've already talked about that. None of my immediate family is even bothered in all of this to come and ask me what's happened to the cars, the money, jobs, what's going on. Isn't that strange? So I have a life-changing event where all this stuff disappears in the matter of 2-3 years. And there's no inquiry as towards what's going on. The question I have as well is when the furnace was turning on, when this device was being run. If you've ever sat and felt yourself like getting a static charge under blankets or something like that, so that's what this felt like. So I began to question and wonder if charging my body wasn't to get the particles to stick to your lungs, such as when you have a cigarette, dust in a house, potentially asbestos, Who knows, maybe that static electricity as well as charging these chips, RFID chips, nano chips, whatever you got in the body. Interestingly enough, and I haven't heard this talked about at all on any of the recordings I've listened to, it seems like you get tested before you get hit, and what it feels like is a mosquito bite. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that. This 20/40 split that I heard so much about on the road as a truck driver, I'm still not sure what that is. I started doing some research, apparently back as far back as what, the 40s, 50s, they were creating these devices that you could point and click at somebody and determine their health status. There's obviously a number of items out there that they were working on. Interestingly enough, while going through all this, in 2013 pops up on headline news on Yahoo that they were in fact taking these particles, were able to spin them, nanotech in your body, and be able to destroy cancer tissues. That's a very interesting technology, and after some of the recordings I had listened to online, that's almost exactly how they had done this. Also, in that same time frame, Dr. Oz comes on with a show talking about being able to point ultrasound at your head, and basically that deadens pain. So I question if that wasn't used as well to minimize the pain while they were literally burning my insides. Like I said, I was talking about the 20/40 split. It's interesting to me that it seems like the cycle went like a cycle to numb the brain, then to possibly soften the area, then to test the area, and then do the burning. Because like I've said over and over again, I'm on this 10, 11 to 25 to 38 to 50 to the top of the hour type cycle. Once again, 2012, 2015, Burn the Worst, classed as a pedophile. 2016, I'm switched to now I'm a dangerous individual. That needs to be watched. Interestingly enough, this Katie, after enormous events that had happened to me, approximately a week or two later, she would take a trip to her doctor, claiming that it was an appointment just for herself. A part of Affinity Medical Group, this, that, and the other. Wasn't there a sharing of information there, and was possibly she getting an update on what was going on with me? Interestingly enough, out there being a truck driver, hearing we need spotters, always seemed to be coming from people that were with handicap license plates, military license plates, U.S. government plates. Interestingly enough, too, you got to look at the people that were typically driving. Why do they always wear baseball hat, sunglasses? The majority of them have military stickers, some sort of tech school stickers, or medical stickers on the back of their cars. A lot of these perpetrators that are carrying out these attacks obviously are driving SUVs, some Chevy Impalas, but it always seems to be either a Ford or a Chevy. Standard colors, black, white, white, gray, and maroon. I've heard on it now 4 times about being given stage 4 lung cancer. McDonald's, Chrissy, commercial on TV sitting with Katie, and a comment actually from the neighbor. Interestingly enough as well, is if you disconnect your cable and go Air TV, on my particular situation, on my prescribed times, the TV will flicker or the picture will go out completely in making those transitions from stage to stage. I've only been to the doctor now 4 times. Obviously, I talked about 3 of them. I went then again to the doctor in a time frame around the time I went for the emergency room. So technically, it was only 4 times I had gone. Never had this stuff like MRI or ultrasound, but my guess is in the scrotal area, the seminal vessel, testicles, prostate, epidemis, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. I would almost assume that those have either been ruined or completely burned away in some facet. Obviously the testicles, microwaved enough to produce nothing. The interesting scenario with my mother and the comments she had made to an x-ray technician at a dentist one time, and that comment of, we don't go down that far, so don't worry about it, and then excusing herself from the room the day that I was at the emergency room talking to the doctor. Like I said, Wi-Fi, I'm guaranteed, is being used obviously for monitoring of you in your home on the cameras. What involvement it plays in the targeting, I'm not sure, but there has to be some connection and tie to that. I'm not exactly sure if this is all a satellite scenario. Considering every single time I've been hit, there's been somebody next to me or in the area, and somebody either holding a device, or you can hear the clicking and popping in the walls. Certainly could be a relay, I suppose, and a satellite zapped the relay, and then it hit me on the inside of the house. I'm not sure. Comment to me about 5G. Is that just going to make the response time faster and quicker? So in essence, there will be no testing of you. It'll go straight from right into burning, and it's going to be more harsh. I'm not sure. Also interesting as well, as I began to ride around, obviously, to police stations, hospitals, clinics, courthouses, jails, and lawyers' offices, and found well over half of those vehicles have been involved in my situation. Interestingly enough, I've been now tested again this year, 2018, when I went back to the plasma place after I came off the road, and there's a few individuals working there, parked behind the building, that are well involved. So no wonder I'm sitting in the chair at plasma and I'm being hit. Obviously the recording and twisting of stories to get the police involved. Let's see here. Yeah, the nonstop hounding during big events, robberies, shootings, car stolen, president, abductions. I seem to be the focus. 2014 basically stated that I was dead. 2015 stated that I was dead, and so on. Now we're out here in 2018, the absolute eradication, my understanding, is now in place, and we're focused now on lungs, heart, esophagus, thyroid. Interestingly enough, we are now deep into this remote neural monitoring. On a daily basis, I have an enormous amount of pain in my head, directly in the center of my brain, and that spot that I was talking about in the story behind my nose. So it's funny to me now that we are going to move into this control scenario. Interestingly enough as well, Katie made a comment the other day about being in the program phase. I'm not exactly sure what that meant in her mumbling, but that's what I heard. Also, something I'd like to make a comment about is the enormous amount of peanut butter that I've eaten in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, I guess had I known then what I know now, I would have never eaten any. But you know, you listen to a guy by the name of Brian Too talk about the peanut butter issue. And something else I'd found out about peanut butter, it contains a high amount of carbon, which, you know, you could take the carbon and make a diamond out of. It seems to stick very well in the esophagus, probably easy enough to burn. I've talked about ingesting dark liquids, and that seems to work well for them as well for burning you. Question about the peanut butter too, when you take it, does it make the x-rays, MRIs, whatever they're using to get a reading on you, show up better? You know, frankly, I'm getting a little tired. I'd like to understand this program a little better, and all these thugs that don't seem to have a problem talking about what has happened. That story of the subway, where the guy behind the counter calls his buddy up, a co-worker at the subway. He comes down to the subway and he says, well, where's the guy that got his nuts fried off? And pointed me out, and I'm sitting there eating my sandwich like, really? Is this going to now be a regular and a constant everywhere I go? Once again, I'm going to make this statement. Yeah, you look back to what was going on at the fast food restaurants, the coffee houses. If there was family involvement, and then making of food, to all the food that I ate with this Katie, if that wasn't the whole scenario of loading me up with nanotech. The undertow of all this seems to be behavior modification and wanting desperately to, like I said, stop energy drinks. I could go into a story with my father about his comments on the road when we were driving, but there's no point. Going forward now, future recordings. Obviously, if I make some in the future, will be based upon targeting and the technology behind it, as I try to delve deeper to uncover the actual devices and what's being used. It's very sad to have to sit down and actually put all this stuff together. I don't know how best to describe it. I look at the potential individuals that are involved in this, and I'd hate to think that family's involved, but given what I've gone through so far, I don't know what to think of it. So in closing, I'm just going to make the same statement. I, Troy Wolf, do solemnly affirm that the evidence that I gave is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.